Melissa Collins blinked twice. Sure, her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, there it was. Marine One, the official presidential helicopter, gently descending into the empty field behind her modest little home like something out of a movie. The sheer absurdity of it made her brain short-circuit. And yet, the truth was even stranger than the sight itself. Because the reason Marine One had come all traced back to a single decision she'd made just 3 weeks earlier. A quiet act of kindness. A choice to give up her first-class seat to a stranger with burned scars and haunted eyes. And now, now her world was about to be turned upside down. But to understand how she got here, we need to rewind. Welcome to Tales Unveiled, where the everyday becomes unforgettable. Let's start at the beginning. Melissa had been a travel agent at Sunshine Travel for almost 6 years. She knew every cruise line, every resort, and could rattle off the flight schedules of half the airlines serving Europe without even checking. Her job was helping people plan their dream vacations, luxury safaris in Kenya, honeymoon getaways to overwater bungalows in the Maldives, or gourmet tours through Tuscany. She could describe the thread count of Egyptian cotton sheets in Singapore like she'd slept on them herself. But of course she hadn't. In fact, Melissa had never even left the country. Her own vacations, if she could swing them, consisted of long weekends at her mom's timeshare in Tampa. And yet, no one could sell a fantasy quite like Melissa. Her boss once called her the architect of dreams she never got to live, a description that was both poetic and painfully accurate. Melissa didn't complain. She genuinely loved her job. Her desk was cluttered with postcards from grateful clients and photos of sunsets she'd helped plan, destinations she'd booked, pools she'd researched, spas she could describe in vivid detail, though she'd never stepped foot inside. For her, that was enough. Almost. Her co-worker Lindsay once asked her, during their daily microwave leftovers lunch at the break room table, "Don't you ever get jealous? You've booked luxury trips for people who've never even said thank you, and you're still eating lean cuisine." Melissa had smiled a little tiredly. Sometimes, yeah, but helping someone live their dream, that's almost like living it myself. Almost. So when her younger sister Emma called to announce she was getting married, in Sydney, Australia, no less, Melissa didn't even think twice. She was going. Even if it meant emptying her savings account and flying coach for 18 hours, knees jammed into the seat in front of her. What she didn't expect was for her co-workers to get wind of it. "You've never flown first class," Lindsay said one afternoon, her voice hushed but excited. "And you deserve it more than anyone I know." That's when they presented her with the ticket. Unbeknownst to her, they had pulled together airline miles, travel agent perks, and every discount code they had to upgrade her to first class. For weeks, Melissa floated on air. She read every review of the airline's premium service, memorized the menu options, and even practiced what she'd say when she was offered champagne upon boarding. Emma teased her during their last call before the flight. "Are you more excited about the wedding or the plane ride?" Melissa laughed. "Can you blame me? This might be the fanciest thing I'll ever do." She arrived at the airport 3 hours early, too giddy to sit at home. She wore a new outfit she'd carefully chosen. Not flashy, just something that would make her feel like she belonged up there with the business travelers and CEOs. She looked the part, or so she thought. But then, as she sat waiting to board, she noticed someone out of the corner of her eye. A man sat alone, not far from the gate. No one sat next to him. In fact, people seemed to actively avoid doing so. At first, Melissa thought he might just be one of those don't talk to me types. But then he turned slightly, and she saw the right side of his face. It was covered in severe burn scars, pulling his skin tight and rigid. His hands, resting on a worn carry-on bag, were similarly damaged, twisted, stiff. Melissa's stomach turned, not in revulsion, but in empathy. She'd seen that expression before. Her father, after his stroke, wore that same look, the one that said, "I see you avoiding me. I know you're uncomfortable, and I'm pretending not to notice." She called it the invisible man expression, the kind people wore when the world decided to stop seeing them. A flight attendant approached the man to check his boarding pass. She was polite, professional, but distant. She didn't lean in like she did with others. Instead, she pointed to the gate from a distance. The man nodded wordlessly and gathered his things. Then came the announcement. Flight 722 to Sydney is now boarding first class and priority passengers. Melissa stood up, her heart racing. But before she could walk past him, the man dropped a small toiletry bag. Its contents spilled across the floor: razor, comb, travel-size mouthwash. No one moved. Everyone looked away. Melissa stepped forward without thinking. She knelt, gathering the scattered items, and handed them to him. "Here," she said softly. The man looked up at her. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet, gentle, unexpected. She handed him his boarding pass. Seat 38D. Coach. Middle seat. Back of the plane. A 14-hour flight in a cramped seat with no elbow room, rubbing shoulders with strangers. Melissa looked down at her own pass. 2A. First class. Champagne and warm towels. And then, without thinking too hard, she made a decision. "Excuse me," she said. Would you like to switch seats with me? I'm in first class." The man froze. Why would you do that?" Melissa smiled. "Because it looks like you could use the space more than I could." He started to shake his head. "I couldn't possibly." But Melissa was already handing him her ticket. "Please," she insisted. "I want you to have it." A flicker of something. Was it gratitude? Or disbelief? Crossed his face. "I haven't had someone be that kind to me in, well, a very long time." They walked to the gate together. The attendant blinked, confused, when Melissa explained the switch. "Are you sure, ma'am?" she asked. "I'm sure." And as the man stepped into first class and was handed a real glass of champagne, Melissa found her seat near the back, between a teenager playing loud mobile games and a woman who promptly fell asleep on her shoulder. But she didn't regret it. Not for a second. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane cruised high above the Pacific. Melissa sat wedged in her middle seat, legs cramped, back sore, shoulder numb from the elderly woman leaning against her. The tray table in front of her held a barely edible meal, rubbery chicken drowning in gravy and soggy vegetables swimming on the side. She poked at it half-heartedly, eyes wandering up toward the front of the plane, trying to imagine what 2A looked like now. A reclining seat, linen napkin, real silverware, and maybe, if she were lucky, a glass of wine that wasn't served with a foil lid. At one point, she stood up to stretch and made her way down the aisle. As she passed through the plush first-class cabin, she spotted him, the man with the burn scars. He was resting comfortably, legs stretched out, a cloth napkin folded neatly in his lap. A glass of wine, deep red and gleaming, sat on the tray beside him. When their eyes met, he straightened slightly. There was a question in his gaze. Was she okay? Did she want the seat back? Melissa smiled and gave him a small wave. She hoped it said everything. No, she didn't regret it. Yes, he deserved it. The tension in his expression softened. He nodded once, deeply, gratefully. Melissa returned to her seat, feeling more at peace than she ever expected. Sure, she was exhausted. Her carefully selected outfit was rumpled beyond recognition. This was definitely not how she imagined arriving at her sister's wedding. But still she felt full, whole, like she'd done something that actually mattered. A few hours before landing, a new flight attendant came by her seat. "Ms. Collins?" she asked. Melissa blinked, surprised. "Yes." The attendant held out a folded napkin. "The gentleman in 2A asked me to give this to you." Melissa took it, unsure what to expect. She unfolded the napkin carefully. Inside, written in a slightly shaky but neat hand, were the words, "I won't forget your kindness. Thank you for seeing me." She stared at the message for a long time, reading it again and again. She folded it back up gently, as though it were something precious, tucked it into her purse. In that moment, it felt like she'd been given something far greater than a first-class experience. When the plane finally touched down in Sydney, passengers began the usual chaotic shuffle to gather their belongings and push toward the exit. Melissa lost sight of the man in the crowd. She never even caught his name, but that was okay. The week that followed was filled with joy. Her sister's wedding was beautiful, sunlit, surrounded by friends and family, and full of laughter. Melissa didn't talk about the flight, didn't mention the seat. It wasn't the point. She soaked up every moment with Emma, explored the city, took photos, ate too much, laughed even more. By the time she returned home to her small house in the suburbs, it almost felt like a dream. And then, 3 weeks later, it happened. It was 5:47 a.m. when Melissa jolted awake. A deep, rhythmic thumping filled her room, shaking the window panes and rattling the picture frames on her wall. At first, she thought it might be an earthquake, but as the sound grew louder, more distinct, she recognized it. The unmistakable whump 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 of a helicopter's rotors. She leapt out of bed and ran to the window. What she saw made her gasp. A massive white and green helicopter was descending toward the open field behind her house. Her breath caught as the words United States of America came into view on its side. It wasn't just a helicopter. It was Marine One. "What on earth?" she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. Her backyard was awash in light as the helicopter's landing beams lit up the darkness. Suited men moved with practiced precision, scanning the perimeter, communicating through earpieces. 2 black SUVs had appeared in her driveway, their tinted windows gleaming under the rotor wash. A small crowd had gathered at the end of the street, held back by local police. Melissa's heart raced. This can't be real. She looked down at herself, wearing faded pajama pants and an old high school t-shirt. Her hair was a mess. The dishes from last night were still in the sink. Her house looked exactly like you'd expect a travel agent's to look at dawn on a Saturday. Then, 3 sharp knocks at the door. She froze. Another knock. Precise. Measured. Official. With a deep breath, she opened the door. A tall man stood on her porch. Black suit, badge clipped to his belt, the kind of calm confidence that screamed Secret Service. "Miss Collins?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "We apologize for the early hour, ma'am. You have some visitors who would like to speak with you. Could you be ready in 15 minutes? "Visitors?" she stammered. "On Marine One." The agent allowed a small smile. "Yes, ma'am. If you could get dressed, they'll explain everything." Melissa moved in a daze. She threw on the first decent outfit she could find and ran a brush through her hair. Through the kitchen window, she saw that the helicopter had fully landed. Its rotors were still turning slowly. A group of people waited nearby, some in suits, some in full military dress. As she stepped outside, the agent escorted her across the lawn. One of the uniformed men broke away from the group and approached. Melissa's breath caught. It was him, the man from the flight. But now, instead of tattered hoodie and jeans, he wore a sharply pressed army dress uniform, covered in ribbons and medals. His cap shaded part of his face, but she recognized the burned scars. He extended his hand. "Ms. Collins, I'm Colonel Thomas Garrett, United States Army Special Forces. We met briefly on a flight to Sydney." Melissa shook his hand, still trying to wrap her head around the situation. "You're military?" "Yes, ma'am." He nodded. "I was traveling to Australia for experimental burn treatment, some of the best in the world. But at the time, I wasn't just another soldier." He paused, glancing at the helicopter. 3 years ago, during a classified operation, my unit was ambushed. My team was trapped inside a burning building. I went in and got everyone them out, but I didn't come out unscathed. He gestured to his face. The scars, the damage. Melissa felt a lump rise in her throat. "But every one of my men made a home to their families," he said, his voice even, "and that made the price worth it." Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. "I hope you'll forgive the dramatic entrance, Miss Collins, but I wanted to thank you in person. Your kindness that day, it changed more than just my flight." Melissa's mind was still catching up. The medals, the uniform, the presidential helicopter humming behind him like something out of a documentary. She blinked, trying to make it all add up. "You were on a classified mission. You got your entire team out." Colonel Garrett nodded. "Every man. Some were injured, but all of them made it back. I didn't know if I was going to make it myself. To be honest, he touched the side of his face lightly. The scars didn't need an explanation. And the flight to Sydney? Melissa asked. I was headed there for a final round of treatment. The doctors there developed a specialized procedure. One I wasn't sure I'd even be approved for, but I got in. He looked at her, his gaze steady. But the truth is, I was dreading that flight. I'd gotten used to people looking through me. Or worse, away from me. Until you saw me. Melissa felt her cheeks burn. I didn't do anything that special, she murmured. Colonel Garrett shook his head. That's where you're wrong. You didn't just give up a first-class seat. You gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. Humanity. You looked me in the eye. You treated me like a person, not a set of scars. She didn't know what to say. Her chest felt tight, her throat even tighter. He gestured toward the helicopter. After I got back from Australia, I received the Medal of Honor. 3 days after landing, I was at the White House. Melissa's mouth fell open. The Medal of Honor? That's the highest military. Decoration, yes, he finished for her. But that day, during my speech, I talked about you. Me, she breathed. I told him about the woman who didn't flinch, who didn't look away, who gave up something she'd waited her whole life to experience. For a stranger. He smiled again, softer this time. The First Lady was in the audience. After the ceremony, she asked to speak with me privately. And when she heard you were a travel agent who'd never actually traveled in the way you helped others do, she had an idea. Melissa stared at him, speechless. We're here today, he said, because she wanted to be part of giving something back to you. Something meaningful. Something unforgettable. A woman in uniform stepped forward, saluted, and addressed Melissa. Ms. Collins, if you're willing, we'd like to take you somewhere. It's a small thank you, a gesture of appreciation. Melissa blinked. Take me where? Colonel Garrett chuckled. You'll want to see it for yourself. Consider it the first part of your thank you gift. 20 minutes later, she was boarding Marine One. It was surreal. The rich leather seating, the polished interior, the quiet respect with which everyone spoke to her. Melissa kept expecting someone to tell her it was all a mistake, but no one did. As the helicopter lifted off, she glanced out the window and watched her modest neighborhood disappear beneath them. Colonel Garrett sat across from her, relaxed now, like a man who had stopped running. Where are we going? She asked. To Andrews Air Force Base. He replied, that's just the beginning. At Andrews, Melissa was escorted across the tarmac to a waiting C-37A, a gleaming military jet, the kind usually reserved for high-ranking officials or diplomatic envoys. It looked more like a luxury business plane than anything she'd ever booked for a client. The inside was stunning, polished wood panels, leather seats, a private cabin space. It was a level of comfort she'd only ever seen in brochures. This is incredible, Melissa whispered as she ran her fingers over the armrest. But I still don't understand why. When I told your story at the White House, Colonel Garrett said, something happened. Everyone in the room recognized that what you did was bigger than a seat switch. It was a reminder, a moment of compassion when no one else offered one. And that hit home. He leaned back as the jet prepared for takeoff. The First Lady found out you'd spent your career helping others enjoy the world, but hadn't experienced it yourself. So she proposed something bold. Melissa looked out the window as the jet lifted into the clouds. What exactly did she propose? She suggested we give you something you spent your life giving others, he said. A dream vacation. One that's absolutely 100% yours. Destination, Hawaii. But not just any part of Hawaii. They were flying her to Hail Koa, the exclusive military resort tucked into Waikiki Beach, normally reserved for service members and their families. You'll be staying in the suite reserved for visiting dignitaries, Colonel Garrett said as they cruised at altitude. Private access to military-only beaches, a cruise around Pearl Harbor, helicopter tours of areas normally off-limits to civilians. Melissa stared at him, stunned. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he replied. Just enjoy it. Let us say thank you. Tears filled her eyes, but she wiped them away before they could fall. All this because she'd given up a seat? No, because Colonel Garrett said gently, as if reading her thoughts. All this because you reminded me I was more than my scars. That's worth more than you know. Over the next few days, Melissa found herself in a dream she never dared imagine. On her second day in Hawaii, she was given a private tour of Pearl Harbor by a Navy captain. They approached the USS Arizona Memorial from an angle no tourist boat was allowed to take. This view is normally reserved for diplomats, the captain explained, or heads of state. Melissa looked around, overwhelmed. Why is everyone doing this for me? She asked. I just gave up a seat. The captain looked at her for a long moment. Colonel Garrett isn't just a soldier. He's a legend in the Special Forces community. When he got hurt, something inside him changed. He became withdrawn, quiet, kept to himself. But after your act of kindness, he came back different, like something was restored. We all noticed. He paused. You didn't just help him. You reminded all of us why we do what we do. Melissa didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded and whispered, "Thank you." Each day in Hawaii brought something new, something Melissa would have never thought to ask for, even in her wildest client itineraries. One morning, she was invited on a helicopter tour of the island, courtesy of the U.S. Army, not the commercial tours she'd booked 100 times for honeymooners, but a private flight with 2 military pilots and clearance to fly over restricted training areas. As the chopper rose above the lush coastline, one of the pilots handed her a headset. His voice crackled through the earpiece. Colonel Garrett said you'd appreciate this next spot. It's his favorite place on the island, not even on the maps. They crested a ridge, and Melissa gasped. A waterfall, tall and silver, poured into a crystalline lagoon nestled deep within untouched jungle. There were no roads, no trails, just wild green wrapped around turquoise, water like a secret kept from the world. It's beautiful, she breathed. The pilot smiled. Colonel Garrett came here after his final surgery. He said it reminded him what he was fighting for. Melissa pressed her fingers against the glass, eyes misting. She couldn't believe that just weeks ago she'd been planning itineraries from her desk, never dreaming something like this could be hers. But the most moving moment came not during a flight or a private cruise, or even the champagne welcome she received at the resort. It happened quietly on her last night, as the sun melted into the horizon, washing the beach in golden light. A table had been set for 2 on the edge of a military-only beach. White linen, flickering candles, and the scent of plumeria in the breeze. Colonel Garrett arrived in a polo shirt and slacks, looking relaxed in a way Melissa hadn't seen before. He smiled as he approached, pulling out her chair. "I've been wanting to tell you something," he said, sitting across from her as the sky turned shades of peach and lavender. She looked at him expectantly. "The treatment I received in Australia, it worked better than anyone had hoped. My recovery's been fast. And next month, I'm heading back to the final procedure." "That's amazing," Melissa said, truly happy for him. He nodded. "Last time I dreaded that flight. I kept my head down. I tried to disappear into the crowd. But this time," he paused, then looked her in the eyes. "This time, I've booked 2 first-class tickets." Melissa blinked, unsure what he meant. "The second one is for you," he said simply. "If you come with me." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "I know you're not military or family or obligated in any way, but you're someone I trust. And having you there, it would make a difference." She looked out at the ocean, trying to process everything. It wasn't about the flight. It wasn't about the luxury. It was about connection, about showing up for someone not out of duty, but out of humanity. "I'd be honored," she said softly. The following morning, as the military jet carried her back home, Melissa stared out the window, watching the clouds drift beneath them. Her thoughts kept circling back to her desk at Sunshine Travel, to all the brochures, all the fantasy vacations she'd helped others experience. Now, she had stories of her own, not ones you could buy with money, not things she could have found in any resort catalog. Real stories, unforgettable moments, a gift born from the smallest, quietest act, giving someone a seat. When she arrived home, tired but glowing, she found a small package waiting at her door. Inside was a perfectly detailed model Marine One. just like the one that had landed behind her house, and a handwritten note in the same careful, slightly shaky script from the airplane napkin. Some people spend their lives collecting luxury experiences. Others, like you, collect moments of kindness. Thank you for reminding me which one matters more. Colonel Thomas Garrett. Melissa placed a model helicopter on her desk at Sunshine Travel, right next to the postcard from clients and the souvenir snow globes from cities she'd never visited. Now, when people asked about it, she didn't just say, "Oh, that's from a story." She told them about the flight, about the man with the burned scars, about what it meant to truly see someone, and how sometimes a single small kindness can ripple out and change everything. Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to Tales Unveiled for more real-life moments that move the soul. And don't forget to check out the next video waiting for you on screen. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, Melissa's life didn't exactly change overnight. She still worked at Sunshine Travel, still took the early morning train, still helped newlyweds plan honeymoons they'd never forget, and retirees book their bucket list adventures. But something inside her had shifted, because now she wasn't just the architect of dreams. She was someone who had lived one. And every so often, when her co-workers would crowd around her desk, asking about the tiny Marine One model or the shimmer in her eyes, she'd tell the story. Not to brag, not for praise, but because it reminded her that even in a world full of noise, small gestures still matter. She'd say, there was a man, a soldier, and a seat on a plane. And those who listened would lean in just a little closer, because somehow they could feel it too, the weight and wonder of a story. A few weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, sealed with a gold embossed crest Melissa didn't recognize. Inside was a note from the office of the First Lady. Dear Ms. Collins, your story moved us all. Your compassion reminds us of the quiet strength that holds our world together, one selfless choice at a time. Thank you for reminding us that leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just kind. Warmly, the First Lady of the United States. Melissa held the letter in both hands like it was something fragile, holy. She couldn't help but think back to that moment in the airport. The crumpled toiletry bag, the looks of avoidance, the decision that hadn't felt all that heroic at the time. Just human. But now, it was clear it had mattered. Months passed, and as seasons changed, Melissa stayed in touch with Colonel Garrett. They wrote letters. Short ones, but always thoughtful. He'd send her updates from various parts of the world, always careful with the details, but letting her know he was doing well, that the surgeries had gone better than expected, that he'd gone back into the field, leading quietly, as he always had, but with a renewed strength. One day, she received a photo. It showed Colonel Garrett standing with his unit, smiling, not just with his mouth, but with his eyes. On the back, he'd written, "They say strength is about never breaking, but I think it's about healing when you've been broken. Thanks for helping me start again." Melissa placed a photo on her corkboard, next to the napkin, next to the Marine One model, next to all the proof that kindness had a weight and a reach far greater than she'd ever imagined. One rainy afternoon, a young couple came into Sunshine Travel. Newlyweds, bright eyes, big dreams. They wanted to go somewhere beautiful, somewhere special, but they didn't have a huge budget. "We want the kind of trip," the young woman said, "where we come back changed." Melissa smiled. "I might have just the place," she said, pulling up her chair. She began typing. As the details filled her screen, lush landscapes, quiet beaches, hidden waterfalls, she realized she was planning a trip she herself had taken not so long ago. She added a note to their itinerary, a suggestion for a spot not in any brochure, not listed on Google Maps. She leaned in and whispered, "It's not on any guidebook, but if you make it to this ridge and wait for the morning light, you'll understand why it's special." They looked at her like she had just handed them a secret. She had. And so the cycle continued. Kindness passed from one person to another, unseen, quiet, but deeply, profoundly real. Melissa didn't need awards or medals or viral stories. She didn't need to relive her 15 minutes of fame. she had something better. She had a reminder, etched in memory, written on napkins, sealed in letters, that the smallest gestures, when done with heart, ripple out in ways we can never predict, and that sometimes giving up a seat is the beginning of a journey far greater than any travel agent could ever design. So the next time you see someone quietly offer up a seat or stop to help when no one else does, remember, it might look like a small act, but it could be the start of something unforgettable. Thank you for watching Tales Unveiled. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. And if you've ever experienced a moment of unexpected kindness, share it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Until next time, keep your heart open, because sometimes that's all it takes.